Thank you, Keith. As I was putting this talk together, I realized that there's way too much. There's too much content. There's no way to talk about handling adversity in an hour. So I'm gonna split it into two, probably 3 sessions. So hopefully you could make it to that. If you can, great. If you can't, hopefully I believe you'll get something out of it tonight. And like I said, my objective here is for you to leave here feeling, and some of these things you might have heard before. Some of them might be new. Some of them might be the same thing, but from a different angle. But my objective is for you to leave here tonight feeling more confident, maybe a little bit more spring in your step, that you can handle the adversity that you have right now, and you're better prepared for it in the future. So anyway, like I said, when I was putting this talk together, I realized there's no way we're going to be able to go through all of it. So I'm going to do a quick commercial for next time. Next time, we're going to talk about Hannibal from Carthage, what we learned from him about adversity. We're going to talk about wrestling. Okay. Suzanne, did your heart just skip a beat when you saw those guys? I saw that look. I saw the look. So, we're going to talk about wrestling, what we learned about adversity there. We're going to talk about Stonewall Jackson, what we can learn from him. We're going to talk about the importance of a Christmas ham to handling adversity. We're going to see what Winston Churchill can teach us. And we're going to talk about what the phonograph can teach us about adversity. I'm going to tell you the last thing I learned about handling adversity, the most recent thing. And I'll be honest, I did not learn this myself. My wife forced me to learn it. So the reality is that, I felt that when I had a challenge, it was mine and mine alone. Simple. It's my challenge. I also had the Sinclair Lewis, George Babbitt philosophy of, this is my personal life, this is my business life, this is my health, this is my religious life, and everything was separate. Not the case. All these things bleed into each other, and I think everybody in this room is probably wiser than me about that. If not, hopefully this is something that you're going to take on board. But if you're having challenges in business, it's going to bleed into your marriage if you're married. If you're having challenges in your marriage, it's going to bleed into your business. If you're having trouble with your health, it's going to bleed into your work, or so on and so forth. So we're going to be jumping around a lot. So if you feel like this, let me know. Or this guy that I know, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. His mother dropped out of high school to have him at 16. Okay, his parents got married at 17 and 19. And, they were pretty broke. And one of his earliest memories is of rats. Okay? I know he told me that he slept with the covers over his head till he was 26 years old because he was afraid the rats were going to eat him because the places they lived had a lot of rats in a not so great neighborhood. He wasn't a very popular kid. Most people didn't like him. But the next door neighbor he had liked him. His name was Gus. And so for some reason, Gus liked this kid. And this little boy would go over there and play all the time. And then one day his father said, "You can't go over there and play at Gus's anymore." And he was upset, very upset. And he found out later the reason why was because somebody broke into Gus's house and Gus shot and killed him. So anyway, time goes by. He's about grade 3. The teachers decide this kid's got a learning disability. He's got some problems. They figure, this kid can't be taught. So they give him an IQ test. And I don't know what your opinion of IQ tests are, but in my opinion, I don't think they're that accurate. They gave this kid in grade 3 an IQ test. He tested out as a second-year university student. So they figured, maybe there's something there. Maybe the kid is bright. So they figured out he was hyperactive. They call that ADHD or something like that. They put him on this experimental drug, which was called Ritalin. Maybe you've heard of Ritalin. The recommended dosage for Ritalin today is between 5 and 15 milligrams. This kid was on 135. It was experimental. So he was having hallucinations. So he'd go to his parents, "Mommy, these triangles are attacking me," or whatever, or "this pentagram attacked me." And the parents, of course, thought, well, he's got an overactive imagination, he's hyperactive, I guess we should up his dosage. So that went on for quite a while. And eventually things calmed down, and then he developed asthma really bad, and he had these big Coke bottle glasses. That was after the family house burned down. I skipped that part. But anyway, so he developed asthma real bad. And he had asthma so bad he couldn't take PE. And so he got beat up all the time. He remembers once getting pelted with tomatoes. He remembers once he got beat up and he didn't come home from school, so his dad had to go out searching for him in the car, found him unconscious, bleeding in a snowbank, and brought him home. Some of you guys are my age, so you're old school, right? So this kid's dad, one time these two twins, your high school students, he was in grade 7, so they were 4 years apart, would pick on this kid all the time because he had a big mouth. Not to say he didn't deserve it, but, he's a lot smaller. So they came to his house one day, knocked on the door. Father opens the door, and the kids say to his father, "We're here to kick your son's butt." But they didn't say butt, of course. So the dad goes, "Get out here!" Brings his son out, makes his son fight both of them at the same time when they're 4 years older. He was doing okay for, two of them. He had one of them, they had this rain catch at his house. He was trying to drown the weaker brother in this drain catch, but the other brother came up from behind and clocked him. The fight ends with, one of them holding the arms down, the other one sitting on his chest, just beating the heck out of his face. Finally, the old man goes, "That's enough," and that was the end. So, anyway, he can't take PE, right, because he's a weakling. One day, he discovers females. He sees these girls and he goes, "Hey, I think I'd like to get me one of them." So he doesn't want to be an asthmatic weakling anymore, so he read this book about how Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States, was an asthmatic weakling. And Theodore Roosevelt trained himself out of asthma because he had a rich father who set up this huge gym at his house and did all this stuff. So he figures, hey, well, it's 100 years later, why not try to trade out of it? So he started exercising. Well, he did like 3 push-ups or whatever, had an asthma attack. They had to rush him to the hospital, give him an adrenaline shot. Tried it again 2-3 days later, he did like 5 push-ups that time. They had to rush him to the hospital again and give him an adrenaline shot. Did this again 2 or 3 days later, did like 8, same thing. This went on and on for a few weeks. He's been to the hospital, 10, 12 times, getting adrenaline shots. Finally, his father goes, "That's it, I've had enough. We ain't doing this anymore. Next time, I ain't taking off work again. You do it again, you die, you die." His mother, she's a little bit more attached to him, because she carried it in her stomach for 9 months and all that, And plus, it's kind of a hassle to plan a funeral, so it's a lot of work. It costs a lot. So they took him to an allergist. But the point is that they found out he's allergic to everything. The doctor says, you should have your son try swimming because swimming is really good for people with asthma. So he goes after the swim team. Well, the problem is the kid doesn't know how to swim. But luckily, the team is so bad that they don't even cut people off the team that can't swim. That's how great this team was. So he's in the little kiddie pool, with water up to his knees or his whatever, and trying to learn how to swim with, doing it like a little 3-year-old with the little arm wing things and all this stuff. And all the other kids are laughing at him. Finally, he gets good enough to go in the bigger Olympic-sized pool, but they put him in lane 8. The fast kids go in 1, 8's the last lane. That's where the people that aren't good go. I was going to say something else. But they put him in there with this floating lane line because he's still a drowning risk and they don't want the school to get sued, so he can grab this lane if he's in trouble. But anyway, by the end of the season, he's one of the best swimmers on the team. Next year, he's captain of the swim team. By the end of that season, he qualifies for nationals in swimming. So he applies to a military university, and he gets a U.S. senator and a congressman to write referral letters for him. Goes into West Point Military Academy, applies for everything, does well on all the tests, graduated near the top of his class in high school, National Honor Society, Eagle Scout, all this other stuff, and fails the eye exam, so he doesn't get in. So then he gets accepted at the second highest military university available that's not government run in about 2 hours after they received his application. So he went to military school. Goes out, in that school you have to take boxing and wrestling. If you don't pass boxing and wrestling, you don't graduate. So he has to take this boxing class. The teacher happens to be also the boxing coach. He sees this kid, you know, is pretty good. He's not afraid of anything. Reason why is because he's used to getting beat up all the time. So he went out for the team. Anyway, he ends up graduating from there as well, near the top of his class, but has to end up paying his way through school. Takes 21 contact hours a semester, has a job, military obligations, is in 2 sports, and some other stuff. I can't remember all the stuff he told me. But anyway, finishes university, ends up about $150,000 in debt, even though he had scholarships, because university is very expensive in America, adjusted for inflation and in Australian dollars. Gets a job with another business, Actually, he worked at this job over the summers. He had to take a year off school. And he started a business, ran it for 4 or 5 months as a contractor, made enough money to pay for the next year's tuition. Then what he would do is in the summertime, he would work there for about 10 to 12 weeks. He'd run a business, he'd make about $30,000. He'd close the business, and then he'd use that to pay the tuition. So anyway, after the military stuff's over, he goes to this company that he started with. He does well. He builds up this business as an independent contractor, distributor guy. And after a while, his broker keeps telling him, get in this tech thing. He's like, no, it's the computers are a fad, internet, whatever. It's not going to save. Because if you're old enough, you remember that the internet was supposed to solve all our problems. It was going to cure cancer in like 5 minutes. I don't know if you're old enough. Some of us are old enough to remember that, right? Now we know it's just a way for people to look at things they shouldn't be looking at. But the point is that he loses it all. Well off, broke again. So he puts it all in like a month before the .bomb, thing, loses it all. Gets sent over to another country, sets operations in that company, grows it from 0 to 31 locations. Then he's dealing with the owners in the United States, trying to explain to them that things are different in different countries. They don't listen. So they end up having undertakings against the company. He's able to manage that. Through all that, still has the highest company productivity, still is the company's best team builder. Anyway, ends up leaving that, goes to another business, sets up his own business because he has a no-compete clause. It's not the same industry. He knew a guy that did it in the U.S., figures that guy's a jerk. If he could treat people as badly as he does, he would do well too. So he just set it up, built it from 13 locations, became a millionaire again. Then he decided he had a problem with the supplier in that country, so he decided to go to another country and start up a factory, because he figured if he's going to get cheated, locally, he might as well get cheated in Asia and pay less. So he sets up a factory in China, even though he has no manufacturing experience, doesn't know anything about manufacturing. Bankrolls this thing, sets it all up. First he starts importing, and he's not the first white guy to get cheated in China. He got cheated on about, it was about somewhere around $1 million, one deal, because it was 14 containers on one deal. He had a quality control staff in place. The quality control staff was bribed to look the other way, so all the stuff came was garbage. The first one was perfect that he did, where he put all the procedures in place, where he had the staff, where he had all the things signed, all this, but then they bribed the staff after he left. So he lost his shirt again, back to zero. Then he spent several years paying that off, then got rich again and sold it. Okay, now of course that's me. And I'm sorry that you went through that. Keith said I had to. I would have rather went to the dentist than go through that story. But the point is that what I'm talking about here, I've had the adversity. I've had and I left a lot of stuff out, personal, that I don't want to get into. But the reality is that I've been through it. I've been in a situation where I'm terrified to answer the phone because I know it's somebody suing me, or somebody that's going to screaming for money, or somebody that's some consumer affairs, or I'm getting audited again, or what. I forgot to mention, I had 4 audits during that time. Had somebody die in my place of business. That was a good one. The business was. We had What else happened? Personal identity theft. I had one employee steal $250,000. Another one steal $100,000. Another one steal, who just wasn't up to par, he only stole $50,000. So the point I'm trying to make is, I understand where you're coming from. I've had adversity. I've been at a point where it just looks as black as it could be. And then I've been at a point where, as far as everyone else was concerned, I could do nothing wrong. And I was the bee's knees or whatever. But the fact is, I was the same guy either way. Same guy. Just different situations. So I want to talk to you about some of the things that I've learned in these situations and some of the things I've learned from history about these things. So first thing I want to do to get through adversity, the first thing you need to do is you need to follow the Sun Tzu model. You guys all know who Sun Tzu is, right? Art of War. The side that will win is the side that has already won. That's what Sun Tzu says, paraphrased. Which means that preparation's the key. You decide ahead of time who's going to be successful and who isn't. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things we can do to prep our teams. First thing we need to do, one thing I always did with my staff that I did that was real, there's a lot of things I did wrong or I wouldn't have gotten the trouble I got in. So I'm not sitting up here going, look at me, I'm the greatest. But one thing I did well is I always taught my guys and gals to act the level above. See, what you got to do is you got to put the framework in place, because guess what? Things are going to go wrong. Even when everything is going perfect, someday they're going to go off the rails. So you got to prepare yourself for it today. And it's just like in the service where they say the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. It's the same thing. So I always taught my guys and gals to act the level above. And I used to promote with them. I used to say, listen, I don't decide if you get promoted. I don't decide. Your peers do. How does that work? Well, simple. You act the level above, they come to me and they start nagging me, why haven't you promoted so-and-so? They're already doing the job. This isn't fair. And that's the thing that I put into them. You empower your staff. If they can handle stuff if you can teach them how to handle stuff when it's easy, they can help you when it's hard. Does that make sense? This seems really obvious, but a lot of people don't do it. Well, like my first manager, my first vice president that I worked with, Marty Dimitrovich, used to say, it worked so well, we quit doing it. And I think that's one of those things. Let's take a real life example, Ukraine. Now, of course, Lieutenant Reed, he's our military expert, so he might correct me. Hopefully he won't correct me too much, but you all watch the news. You know that Russia is not having the success that they thought they were going to have, and the world thought they would have when they invaded Ukraine. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, just like I learned in military university, lieutenants and captains study tactics, majors and colonels study strategy, and of course generals study logistics. Okay, their logistics is a mess, obviously. And obviously it's easier to defend than it is to attack, and you know the terrain and all that. But one of the biggest reasons why they're having the trouble they're having is because of their system. The way they train their soldiers. I have some friends that have trained after 2014, went to Ukraine after they annexed Russia annexed Crimea to help them rebuild their military. And none of them are surprised that it's going the way it went. Because the Soviet army, even since Stalin, because Stalin would kill anybody that had any kind of, would stick their head up or had any kind of motivation or, would make decisions. The Soviet military, their NCOs and their officer corps are weak. They've lost 10 generals, Russian generals in Ukraine. Why? Because the generals and the colonels are doing the jobs that the captains and lieutenants should be doing. Okay? And the captains and the lieutenants and the majors are doing the jobs that the sergeants should be doing. Because no empowerment of their staff. Artillery pieces, Russia has the most in the world, 18,000, Ukraine 3,000. Tanks, Russia has the most in the world. This is more than the US, by the way. Ukraine has 3,700. Aircraft, Russia has the second most aircraft in the world. We have the most. 40 to 1? And this is when they started. Now they're down to like 40 planes in Ukraine. And this includes everything. These aren't combat planes. These aren't 210 F-16s. This is including their little reconnaissance ones that they can't even do anything. So we need to put into our teaching of our staff that these kind of philosophies, that we will prepare ourselves now and our day will come, like Abraham Lincoln said. And if you think about a guy that had adversity, who had to overcome it, he did a lot of preparing. He had a lot of suffering. He had 2 kids die on him. Okay, he started out the war, the Black Hawk War as a captain, ended up a private. He was a manic depressive. He had a genetic disorder that gave him tumors all throughout his body. We can go on and on. He had a business that failed. It took him 17 years to pay off the debt. Lincoln had nothing but adversity after adversity after adversity. Why? Well, those of us that believe in God, and some of us do, some of us don't, would probably argue that God was preparing him to be where he needed to be at the time. Think about trying to hold the country together, having 600,000 of your countrymen killing each other. You get elected, and half the country tries to leave. Then you have your kid die while all this is going on. Then you get smallpox while all this is going on. Then your wife goes insane while all this is going on. It has to be institutionalized. But besides that, he didn't have a lot to handle. So he prepared himself. Institutional myths. I want to talk about this. This is something that is very powerful. Have you guys heard of institutional myths? Yes? No? Maybe so? Are you with me? In Chicago, we'd say, "Are you with me? Are you with me? Are you with me?" We don't say the in Chicago. We'd say, "Go down Southwest Highway." Institutional myths. These are culture myths created to make your company successful. One of the things I did in my business is I would talk about how when I was a contractor, this is before, when I was a business for myself but not by myself. So I was a division manager for a company, and we're competing with 31 other divisions. And I used to talk about how in our division, we're people of character. We finish the race strong. Every campaign we do the best. We finish strong. We finish strong. We always finish better than everybody else. And we would literally do, in a 16-week campaign, this is a sales business, we would do 20% of the volume. We always crushed everybody. We were number one year after year after year, and we crushed everybody because they had this myth. They believed it. Same thing, and companies throughout history are successful. A better example would be this. Vince Lombardi, you guys know Gridiron. I know you go, "Oh, it's not real football, well, those pads are sissies, blah, blah, blah." And I just want to say one thing, Saba. The average lineman in the NFL is 360 pounds. So you can be in a small automobile, and if somebody hits you that side, it's going to hurt. Doesn't matter what you're wearing. But anyway, Vince Lombardi, when he took over coach of the Green Bay Packers, and I know you don't like sports, some of you don't, but bear with me because it's applicable to real life. When he took over 11 seasons, the previous 11 seasons, they did not have one winning season. Not one. The year before he took over, the team had 10 losses, 1 win, and 1 tie. He took over for the next 9 years. They had a winning season every year. They had 5 NFC championships, and the NFC and the AFC merged while he was coach. He won the first 2 Super Bowls. So you could argue he did win 7 out of 9 championships, and he took a team that had a winning season in 11 years. Why? Because of the culture. Not because of, he couldn't get rid of all the players and replace them because of the culture. Winning is a sometimes thing, is an all the time thing, not a sometimes thing. Hewlett-Packard does that. They have this myth that they're all about innovation. They're the only company that can innovate. That was their big thing in the 80s and 90s. It's not true, but they have the myth. One thing I used to do is I used to have to build the culture. Again, this is preparing yourself for adversity that hasn't come yet. Is I'd have the Smooth Award with my staff. Every week we'd have the staff meetings, whatever department it was, accounting. I'd meet with the accountants, or I would meet with the salespeople, or I'd meet with the customer service people, whatever. And I'd have a Smooth Award for every week. So a salesperson would say, "Yeah, this lady wanted to cancel the order. I went in and I turned the cancellation into a $10,000 sale." That's the Smooth Award. The customer service person, this person was going to take us to court. I turned him around, there was happy, and then she bought another $2,000, you know. This accounts receivable person, this person wasn't going to pay their bill, but I got them to pay $5,000 when, you know, they weren't going to pay anything and they were disputing it. So they have a smooth award. So you're teaching them how to handle adversity when things are good. So when things go bad, boom, they're already ready. And they're looking for it, man. They love it. They love to out-smooth each other. They love it. So that's what you do with your staff. Dr. Alan Lloyd McGinnis wrote a book called Bringing Out the Best in People, which is really good. I would suggest you read it. He says in there, he said that good leaders don't just build loyalty into to themselves, they build loyalty to the organization. And how do you build it to yourself? Well, it's pretty easy. One, don't be a hypocrite. Why do we hate all the politicians? Because they say, don't go to a restaurant during COVID, and then there's a picture of them going to a restaurant during COVID. They say, don't pay your taxes, and then they get done for tax evasion. That's why we hate our politicians. So first, you don't be a hypocrite. Second, you have a genuine interest in them. And these are all things you know. I'm just reminding you. And the third thing is, to tie them into you, is have their backs. And that's not happening a lot in a lot of businesses nowadays, where you feel like the boss doesn't have your back. That reminds me of a quick story. You guys have heard of George Patton, right? Some of you have, some of you, he's a general. World War II, okay? He was actually, historically, he's recognized the person who liberated the most people, okay? Of course, it's because he lived, in modern times, but he liberated the most people. And there's a story about him. Eisenhower was his boss. He tried to put this brigadier general on his staff. And Patton hated this guy, thought he was a complete moron, did not want him on his staff. He just did everything he could not to get this guy on his staff. Fought with Eisenhower over it. He lost, so he's on his staff. Well, anyway, this brigadier general goes out, does some incredibly stupid stuff, gets a bunch of people killed. Eisenhower's furious. He's going to fire him, send him back to the U.S. in disgrace. What does Patton do? Patton jumps up and says, no, Ike, you can't do that. It's my staff. Nope, you can't. Nope. And fights to keep this guy, in Europe on his staff. And finally, Eisenhower goes, what the hell are you doing, George? You didn't want this guy. Why are you fighting so hard for him now? And Patton said, well, before he wasn't my guy. That's it. If your people know you have their backs, they'll walk through fire for you. Especially now. Nowadays, it's not as common. All right. How to build allegiance to the organization. Simple. Team night, same kind of things. Team night outs, tying them into a vision, something that's bigger than themselves. What's in it for them? You promote from within. You get them to care about everybody else. These are all hour-long talks, each point, but we're going over it. Moltke, he was the Prussian general, chief of staff for like a long time. I think he died in like the 1890s. But the point is, he's the guy who came up with the idea that no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. You guys have heard that saying before? No battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I mean, they try to say Rommel said it, Clausewitz, but he's actually the guy who came up with it. So now we've got adversity. So let's talk about the adversity, all right? So you've planned all this stuff, you've done everything perfect, and guess what? You still get hosed. Just like I did in China. I did everything perfect, but I still got hosed. So what do you do? Now that the adversity's actually come, well, now you get to cash in on all the hard work you did with your staff. You get to call in all these chits. The fact that you had their back. The fact that they're tied into the team. The fact that you have treated them fairly. I mean, the fact that they're tied into the vision. All that. And the fact that you've trained them to handle things. Patton talks about that. He says, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity. Now you have a staff that can support you. And you got to protect yourself. You have to do what I call protect your pause, protect your positive attitude. In short, you put your mask on first, then assist the child. Because if the leader's not squared away, the ship's going down. That's simple. You got to keep it in perspective and have faith in yourself. And you've got to have something else. Whether it's swimming or karate or bowling, You know, you've got to have something else. And this is especially true for men. I identify as male. Mandy, you probably have noticed that. But maybe this is more true for men. Maybe it's because we're simple. But men, when the world is falling down around them, if they can, in the back, and this is really childish and immature, but so what, it works. In the back of our mind, if we go, yeah, but I can bowl a 210, you can't. You know, the back of our mind we go, well, you can't run a marathon like I can. Back of our mind we go, well, I could beat the hell out of you if I wanted. I'm a black belt. That's what we do. And if you have something else while everything else is falling apart, gives you a lot of strength. Am I right on that or am I wrong? Next point I want to make here. This is when you're having the adversity. You've got to force yourself, even when you don't believe it, to believe that you can get out of it. You got to force yourself to believe you can get out of it. And that reminds me of a story. The Hanoi Hilton. Some of you guys maybe heard of Hanoi Hilton. That was a POW camp in North Vietnam. And there was a fellow who got taken captive. His name was Major Nesmith, James Nesmith. He got taken captive, and he spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton. 7. Actually, over 7. His cell was 5 feet long by 4.5 feet tall. He lived on 150 calories a day, which is slightly less than I eat. To put it in perspective, 150 calories is about an apple and a half. Or, for those of you that fly, it's about 2 of those little bags of peanuts you get on the plane. Major Nesmith didn't have to worry about flying because, you know, he couldn't even stand up in his cell, so that wasn't a problem for him. He was beaten regularly. He was tortured regularly. And in between beatings and torturings, what he used to do to keep himself from going insane, because he's in solitary confinement, which is even harder than being beaten. One of the worst things that you can do, criminals in prison will do anything not to go into solitaire. Okay, because it's horrible. It's very hard. He's in solitary confinement. What he used to do to help himself not go insane is he liked to play golf. He wasn't very good at golf, but he liked to play golf. So he would picture in his mind shooting 18 holes of golf at his favorite course every day. And all different kinds of weather conditions: snow, rain, sunny, cold, blowy, no wind, all this. He would visualize everything: how the grass felt under his feet, how it felt putting the tee in, which way the logo on the ball was pointing, everything. Every single thing, the squirrels in the trees, everything, the flight down the fairway, everything. Anyway, after a certain amount of time, he gets out of prison. He gets out of prison, and remember, he's been beaten. He's lost about 70 pounds. He hasn't touched a golf club in 7.5 years. After about a month, he's got dysentery. After about a month, he goes out to his favorite golf course as a prize to himself for surviving this ordeal. His best, and he shoots a 74. His best before that was in the mid-90s, and he ends up on the semi-pro tour. Why? Because he visualized the success. He visualized it. The Russians found out about this, and in 1980, that's how they trained their golf team. They had 4 groups. They had one group that spent 100% just playing golf. They had one group that did 75% golf, 25% visualization. They had one group that was 50-50. They had one group that was 25% golf and 75% visualization. What group do you think improves the most? The last one. So I'm not one of these guys that stands up here and goes, man, with positive thinking and visualization, you can do anything. That's not true. I don't care how positive I think. I can't have a baby. I don't have the equipment for it. But I do think you can do everything better. And you can do things that would surprise you. Now, I'll give you another quick example. Your staff, okay, this is also important for your staff. Your staff has to see the goal if you're going to get through a challenging time. This is Florence Chadwick. She doesn't look very special, does she? Normal person. Florence Chadwick liked to swim. She wasn't very good. She wasn't a competitive swimmer. She wasn't very fast. But, she had some endurance. So she trained for a while. At the age of 32, in 1951, she swam the English Channel, set the women's world record. The year after, she swam it again the opposite direction, set the world's record the opposite way. Okay? And became the first woman to swim it both ways. The English Channel is about 21 miles. she decided to up the ante, as people who are successful like to do. They like to challenge themselves. So she decided to swim from the California coast to Catalina Island. Well, Catalina Island, unlike the English Channel, California, that area is known for sharks, particularly great white sharks. And the weather's terrible. So she's doing this swim, and she's got a boat on either side of her, so they can like hit the shark over the head, I guess, if it's trying to eat her. I don't see how it's going to help her, but they got these boats for safety. You know, I guess they just know, they'll know what happened, I guess, is all the boat would be able to do. But anyway, so she's swimming. After 15 hours, this heavy fog rolls in. It obscures Catalina Island. She swims for another hour, and she asks him to pull her out. Her mother pulls her out. Her mother was there supporting her. And to her horror, she finds out she's less than a mile away. She went 97% of the distance. She's pretty upset. She does it again. Same thing happens. You know, she's in there about 13, 14 hours. Heavy fog rolls in. This time, she says she learned her lesson. She kept a picture in her mind of the coast, and she finished the swim. Then, because she was mad at herself for letting herself get psyched out, she did it twice more to show that she can beat this thing. She swam the Straits of Gibraltar. She even swam the Straits of Gallipoli. She was the kind, which is 61 miles after that. She's the kind of person that is going to succeed. But she failed. The one time she failed, why did she fail? Because she could not see success. She could not picture it. You have to get yourself to picture it. You have to, or it won't happen. And there's one other quick thing I want to say. This is a small distinction, but for your team, you need to give them hope. There was a fellow named Dr. Kurt Richter. You're not going to like this story at all, Mandy. He's a scientist, and he did experiments with rats. But Mandy, don't get upset, because they're not the nice, cuddly rats. These are the mean, nasty, brown Norway rats that would eat you if they had a chance. So don't feel sorry for them. So he has this big bucket. He puts the rat in the bucket. What he would do is he put them in this bucket. He'd see how long they could live without drowning. And he did this several times until it was statistically significant, and they found the average rat would last 15 minutes. Then he did the experiment again. He put a rat in. Just when it was about to drown, he'd pull it out, he'd dry it off, cuddle it a little bit, just for a minute or two, and then put it back in. How much longer do you think the rat swam? 15 minutes? You think it doubled its time? No? 30 minutes? An hour? How long? They averaged 60 hours. 60 hours, 240 times longer. Imagine if you get 240 times the amount of productivity out of a worker. We definitely all wouldn't be here. We would be in Bermuda or someplace on a beach. But the reality is that, you know, your staff has to have hope. And if they have hope, they can do things otherwise you wouldn't have thought they could have. One thing you got to do is you got to reframe. When the adversity is here, you got to reframe. You got to reframe it. And I'm going to take an example from the Bible. And I know, you know, well, it's a preaching. I'm not preaching, okay? I mean, you got to admit, though, the Bible's been around for, 4,000 years or 5,000 years, whatever. Don't commit adultery. Good advice if you want to keep your money. Don't kill. Good advice if you want to stay out of jail. Okay, so there are some good things in there, all right? But I'm going to take the story of David and Goliath. And for those of us that didn't go to Sunday school or forgot, David is this tiny, wimpy, little, spindly shepherd boy. Goliath is a 6'9" giant Philistine warrior. The Israelites and the Philistines are about to have a battle. And they decided to solve this battle by champions, which is something they used to do in the old times, where you take your best fighter, we take our best fighter, they fight, then not everybody has to die. Okay, which is a reasonable solution. So Goliath is sitting across this river, screaming insults, talking about the Israelis' mothers and their sisters and their daughters, and calling them cowards, and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. Carrying on, and nobody will fight him. And David's a little shepherd boy, and three of his brothers are in the army. He's like, dude, why aren't you fighting that guy? And the brothers are like, have you seen him? No, well, you fight him. And so David goes, oh, okay, I'll do it. Now, his brothers are like, give me a break. You're a tiny little pipsqueak. You can't fight him. He goes, no, I'll do it. His brother's like, no, you can't. He's like, no, I'll do it. And his brothers say, well, they probably think to themselves, well, I mean, we don't really like this guy, and he's really pissing us off, calling us cowards and stuff. We'll just tell Dad we tried to stop him and we couldn't. So anyway, David goes out to fight Goliath, and David is reframing this. He's reframing this fight. See, everybody else is looking at Goliath and saying, man, that guy's too big to hit. David's looking at that guy going, he's really too big to miss. Okay? And David is not looking at Goliath and going, man, I don't think I could beat this guy. David is not comparing Goliath to him. David is comparing Goliath to God. And that makes him look really small. Now again, I'm not preaching. What does this mean in a secular sense? What does this mean from a business point of view? When you have an adversity, you don't look at the adversity and say, this is the adversity versus me. You say, this is the adversity versus all the resources I can bring to bear against the problem. All the lawyers, all the accountants, all the business consultants, all the staff, all my past experience, all the past experience of my staff and my friends and my family. And then the adversity doesn't look that big. Does that make sense? You reframe it. You reframe it. Another thing that is important when you actually are having adversity, if you're losing the game, change the rules. Change the rules. You're a business person. You're an entrepreneur. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to make up your own rules. You started your own business because you don't want anybody telling you what to do. Right? So you change the rules. And this has worked throughout history and business. Okay, let's take Simmons, for example. Simmons Bedding, largest manufacturer of mattresses in the United States, was in the world for a while. Now, they were facing bankruptcy. Very close. Oh my God, they were close. And they were in a lot of trouble. And they thought, how can we get out of this? How can we get out of this? Well, they changed the rule. They changed the rules. Most of you are old enough to remember this. Mattresses used to always be double-sided, right? You could flip them over, right? Well, Simmons rebranded this and came up with the idea of the one-sided mattress. You don't have to flip it over. Isn't that great? They're selling you half the product for the same money and keeping the money. And that's how they got themselves out of Chapter 11, or bankruptcy protection in the United States. Echo Knives did the same thing. Echo Knives was this knife company, and they were middle quality knives. They were getting killed in the marketplace. They're about to go bankrupt. What did they do? Well, they doubled their prices because they figured they couldn't compete with the middle products. They doubled their prices. They did not change their product. They tried to compete with the imported products, which were a lot nicer, like Henkel's and Wusthof Trident, these German fancy knives. And they pulled themselves out of Chapter 11. Their sales went through the roof. They changed nothing but doubling the price. They changed the rules. Elvis Turner Parker. True. He was upset because he wasn't selling as much Elvis paraphernalia as he felt he should. So what did he do? He started selling I Hate Elvis buttons. So he had both sides of the market. He had the people that loved Elvis that was buying stuff, and then he had the people that hated Elvis. He changed the rules. You change the rules. You don't like them, change them. Next thing, if we're facing adversity, don't panic, don't rush. September 11th, I read a book about a book that Rudy Giuliani wrote about 20 years ago on leadership. And the point he made was that when you're a leader, wait to the last minute to make a decision. Get all the information you can, then make the decision. There are times you need to move quickly when you're a leader. But it's best to know what the hell is going on and then make the decision. We have what's called FTXs, field training exercises. Okay, and you'd be a squad leader or a company commander or a platoon leader or an assistant squad leader, whatever. Well, whenever I was platoon leader, the first 2 times, I'm me, so I'm like, I'm a warrior, I lead from the front. And both times, guess what? I got killed. I mean, it wasn't really killed, but I got killed in the field training exercise. Why? Because I was stupid. I mean, the leader needs to be in the middle so he can figure out what the hell is going on. so he doesn't make stupid decisions that makes everybody else get hurt. You know, and it took me a while to figure that out. So it's the same thing. If you're the leader, figure out what's going on, then make the decision. Don't panic, don't knee-jerk. Think about it. Don't overcomplicate things. We all do this. I'm guilty of this, making things so much harder than they really are. I'll give you an example. The U.S. space program is one of the things that's near and dear to my heart as an American. One of the obstacles they had, of many, 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 in the Apollo program in the 60s, was they needed a pen that would write in the weightlessness of space. As you know, how a pen works is the ink falls down the tube, goes in the paper, and you write. Well, there's no gravity in space, so what do? Well, the U.S. government spent about $100,000 and 3 years developing this pen that would write in space. You know what the Russians did? They used a pencil. They used a pencil. Don't make it harder than it is. They used a pencil. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep your eyes open. This is the other thing. Going through adversity, keep your eyes open, and solutions will present themselves. If you're not panicking, if you're thinking. Way back in history, 1167, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire dies. And the guy that's supposed to take his place, I think his name was Henry the Bold. All the princes get together, they go, we don't like this guy, he's a jerk, blah, 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 blah. They put another guy in. This is named Conrad III, right? So they put in this other guy, and he does what, you know, politicians and emperors and kings have done since time immemorial. He, you know, gives all his friends all this land and all these ministerships and all this good stuff. And he gives away the Duchy of Saxony, I think it was. The guy that was supposed to be emperor is now even more mad because his family, that's his family's land. So they go to war. So they have a siege of this town in Germany in 1170. And they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight, and they're just about, finally they've wore down the defenses. It's going to be the last attack, and they're planning on bringing the walls down. They think this is the last attack before they're going to win. And in the old days, when you lost a war, it was not like today. You just killed everybody, took everything, and looted the place. Maybe got some slaves out of it. So at the last minute, they do a deal. The ladies, you know, they do a deal, and the deal is the women can go, and they can take whatever they can carry on their shoulders. Women can go. We won't hurt you women. You can go. And of course, their plan is they're going to, you know, raise this city to the ground. They're going to steal everything, kill all the guys. Well, so it's time for the girls to go. The girls are all marching out the front gate. And the commanders notice that on all their shoulders, they have their brothers, their fathers, their husbands, their nephews, their uncles. The commanders are really pissed. They said, Emperor, they've killed all our comrades. We've been fighting this war for 2 years. You can't let this happen. He says, well, I gave my word. He's impressed with their ingenuity, and they all got out of it. And there's a lot of times I've done stuff like that. I can give you personal examples later, but you flip things around. There's always a solution. There's always a solution. And sometimes it's right in front of you. The other thing you need to do is you need to surround yourself with people that won't let you give up. I've been really lucky at this. Really lucky. Surround yourself with people that won't let you give up. I went to, like I told you, military university. I went to a guy, one of my instructors was Colonel Gupton. Colonel Gupton was at Iwo Jima. His unit took 95% casualties. He was my biology instructor. And at the time, I was a scholarship athlete. Remember, I was in this, military university. I had 3% body fat. Now I have 300% body fat. I mean, that was with the water immersion and not the calipers. I mean, that was the body fat, okay? I was in excellent physical condition, okay, excellent. I remember and I worked out 7 hours a day. And I remember, I always skipped lunch and went to the gym. And I go to the gym, and I see Colonel Gupton in there, who had to be at least 65, maybe older. I walk in, I say, hey, Colonel Gupton, how you doing? He goes, can't talk, doing pull-ups. I went in, he's doing pull-ups. I left 45 minutes later, he's still doing pull-ups. How can I be soft with a guy like that around? This was another one of our instructors we had, Colonel Ripley. Lieutenant Reed probably knows about Colonel Ripley. This guy made the Vietnam War last, for better or worse, Probably another 3 years. He blew up a bridge single-handedly with about 500 pounds of plastic explosives when about 20,000 troops were about to take Saigon. Him and one other 90-pound Vietnamese guy. You know? And when I was at VMI, when I was there, every week we had to do the physical fitness test. It was pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and a 3-mile run, 5-kilometer run. And it was 5.25 times around the parade deck. He still has shrapnel in him. And I don't know about this part for sure because I haven't found it on the internet, but I was told by my friends who knew his son that he also had one of his lungs removed from injuries. So I believe he had half the lungs I have. I was so mad. I'm a nationally ranked athlete on scholarship at a Division I school, and this son of a bitch would lap me. And every week, you're not going to pass me this time. You're not. And he always was so nice about it. But how can you be soft when you got guys like that around? And the last point I want to make here, the next to last point I want to make, is keep this stuff in perspective when you have adversity. After my 3rd or 4th audit, I was pretty down. I also, because of the identity theft, had the ATO chasing me for $400,000. The IRS, who I'm more afraid of, chasing me for $300,000 because of this identity theft stuff. And I was pretty down. And then I had another audit that was actually legitimate. I was depressed. And then I started thinking about the owners of Westfields. Both of the owners, the founders of Westfields, are Holocaust survivors. One of them was in Auschwitz. The other one was in Mauthausen. And I remember thinking, what do you think they say when the ATO gives them a hard time? You think they're intimidated? They're like, dude, if you're not going to come back with a German Shepherd and a swastika on your arm, and you don't have a mobile oven in the truck that you came in, get out of my face. And that put it all in perspective. Same thing. I remember when I was $2.7 million in debt. I remember thinking about Donald Trump. And I know you guys, some of you like him, some of you hate him. But the point is this. He was $900 million US in debt at one time. That's like 1.5 billion Australian. Can you imagine that? Walking down the street, the guy says, hey mate, can you give me $2 for a cigarette or whatever? And that guy's worth $1.5 billion more than you? That put it in perspective for me. And the last thing I want to say is, you got to draw inspiration from the past, when you're dealing with adversity. Okay? Your own past. Your family's past. How they've overcome it. And I talked a little bit about the military university I went to. In the military university, we talked about the long gray line. And the long gray line is all the men, because back then it was all male, now it's men and women, but all the men that went before us that went through officer training and served their country in the service or as citizen soldiers in the vein of Cincinnatus, either in their community or in the uniform. And we talk about that. And I draw strength from that I'm a part of that tradition. But then I was thinking about this group. And you guys are part of a long line. Some of you in here are entertainers. If you're an entertainer, you're part of the long line of people like Marilyn Monroe, like Fred Astaire, like Walt Disney, like Eminem, all these people that were told they were worthless. I mean, Walt Disney was fired because they said he had no original ideas. Elvis Presley was told by a record label to go back to driving a truck. Sidney Poitier was told that he was wasting the guy's time when he applied for a role in a movie. You come from a long line of people that struggled in your industry and succeeded. Some of us in here are coaches or authors. You come from a long line of people that struggled as coaches and authors. People like Alex Haley, who was rejected by 204 publishers before he published, and he won the Pulitzer Prize. People like Dr. Seuss, who were turned down by 70 publishers before he got published. If you're a coach, people like, Tony Robbins started out as a janitor. Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn started out in the Depression with less than nothing. And if you're an entrepreneur, you come from a long line of people that started with nothing or less than nothing and made the world different and remade it in their own image. People like Henry Ford, who started with nothing and brought the automobile to everybody. You know, people like Carnegie, who started with nothing. People like Dyson, who started with nothing. We can go on and on and on with all this long line of entrepreneurs who started with nothing, who went through the hoop 2 and 3 and 4 times, like William Hershey. And then we're successful. What I always try to remind myself, and what I would urge you to remind yourself, is that there are 2 types of people in the world. Zig Ziglar said this. He said the difference between the bum in the Bowery and the mayor in your city, they're both the same. They both have adversity, they both have challenges, but it's how they respond to it. There's 2 different types of people. There's the type of person who sees an obstacle, who goes, I can't do it, sits down and cries. Who feels sorry for themselves. Who's a victim. Who, you know, oh my God, this is so hard. And then there's the kind of person who says, who's discouraged. Who's discouraged. But says, there's an obstacle in my way. What am I going to do? I got to go over it. I got to go under it. I got to go around it. I got to knock it down. What am I going to do? I'm going to be successful anyway. How am I going to do it? How am I going to be successful? How am I going to accomplish what I want to accomplish? And sometimes these people do things that they even believe they can't do. And the question all of us needs to ask is, which kind of person am I? That's it.